speaking of double standards, I noticed this with this Biden bootlicker earlier today, Brian Tyler Cohen. He tweeted earlier today, like he had 2 tweets within 2 hours just today, saying in recent weeks, the U.S. economic growth beat expectations. Americans' income rose, price increases came down. Not prices came down, but price increases came down. Notice how Weasley he is with that framing. But notice the 4th line, he says U.S. gas prices are still declining. They're still declining, presumably thanks to the brilliant economic policies of his hero, jibber-jabbering Joe Biden. And literally 2.5 hours later, Brian Tyler Cohen tweeted this, as oil company Shell reports that they more than doubled their profits this quarter compared to the same time last year. Let's all remember that every single Republican voted against a bill to crack down on gas price gouging. So which is it? Do we get to credit jibber-jabbering Joe Biden for bringing down gas prices, or are gas prices too high because these greedy oil companies are price gouging? Today, let's talk about gasoline prices, because I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but apparently gasoline prices are low, at least according to our president, jibber-jabbering Joe Biden. According to Joe Biden, the president, he says gas prices have decreased for 2 weeks and are down by more than $1.20 since their June peak. That's saving American families with 2 cars about $130 per month on average. So you guys getting this? Gasoline prices today, they're all down. They're decreasing, all thanks to the brilliant economic planning of Democrats in Washington like Joe Biden. And I know a lot of naysayers, like Greg Price over here, he might argue that, yeah, they might have been decreasing the last few months, but they're still higher than before Joe Biden took office. But regardless, if you've been enjoying lower prices at the pump as of late, you should thank a Democrat. You should thank a Democrat. That is, unless you live in the great state of California, which has been governed by Democrats for roughly 12 years at this point, in which case Governor goofy-ass Gavin Newsom says it's all big oil's fault. As you can see here, Gavin Newsom, he specifically singles out Valero, the big oil company Valero, saying that their new profits are out. They've experienced a 500% increase in profits this year. Asking, so why are gas prices so high? It's time to hold these oil companies accountable. Which I find interesting because a few weeks ago, I traveled to the great state of Georgia for a weekend. I traveled to the great state of Georgia, all while here in Los Angeles, California, gas prices were reaching roughly $7 for a gallon of gasoline. And when I went to Georgia, I noticed that gas prices in Georgia were less than half of what they were in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago. They were roughly $3 per gallon. And I even looked this up the other day using a resource like Gas Buddy. They talk about gas prices at specific locations. Here's a Valero. We're talking about Valero because that's who Gavin Newsom is scapegoating right now. I found a Valero gas station in Los Angeles that currently sells gasoline at $5.32 per gallon. Meanwhile, I found a Valero station in Gainesville, Georgia, that's selling at $2.99 per gallon. So you gotta wonder, according to Gavin Newsom's line of reasoning, according to his logic, using his big noggin of his, I guess he expects me to believe that Valero and big oil companies in general, they just happen to be twice as greedy in a state like California. Is that what I'm supposed to believe?
Yeah, to the no, yeah, to the no, to the no, no, no.
Not to mention, while we're talking about Valero, I found this report from the California Energy Commission from 2019 when they investigated gasoline prices. I noticed this chart, which you can see right here. If you notice this chart, Valero has a pretty small market share when it comes to selling gasoline in California. They're not even in the top 5. Valero is not even in the top 5 in market share when it comes to selling gasoline in California. Yet we have goofy ass Gavin Newsom over here talking as if a significant portion of Valero's handsome profits are coming from ripping off Californians.
That's just not smart.
But why are gasoline prices so high in a state like California? Why don't we begin by talking about taxes, gasoline taxes? I found this article from the San Diego Union Tribune written in March of 2021 by Rob Nikolewski, titled, "How much are you paying in taxes and fees for gasoline in California?" He breaks this down, saying, here's what's on the tax side of the ledger. The federal government charges an excise tax of 18.4 cents per gallon. California's excise taxes on gasoline come to 50.5 cents per gallon. That includes 12.7 cents per gallon from the controversial Senate Bill 1 that became law to improve infrastructure and develop transportation programs across the state. And from what I've read, California's excise taxes alone are amongst the highest in the nation. I think only Pennsylvania is ahead of them. From what I've read, most states' excise taxes range between 0 and 30 cents per gallon of gasoline. But the article goes on to say, plus there's a state sales tax, which can vary by area, but the Stillwater analysis estimated that the sales tax average is about 10.7 cents per gallon. Put together, Californians pay 79.6 cents per gallon in taxes. But wait, there's more. He also talks about fees, essential taxes as a result of environmental regulations meant to save the world from climate change. First, you can see the storage tank fee of 2 cents per gallon. Not that much, although someone pointed it out to me on Twitter that this has brought in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue to the government of California over the years. We also have the fuel under the cap fee, which is part of the state's cap and trade program that requires suppliers of polluting fuels to purchase allowances to offset the emissions that result from burning those fuels. The fee varies depending on the price of the cap and trade allowances and currently comes to 14.3 cents per gallon. Then we have the low carbon fuel standard, which requires suppliers of fuels with high carbon intensity to purchase credits from makers of fuels with lower carbon, such as ethanol and biodiesel. This fee also varies, but using recent prices, Stillwater estimated it to be 22.6 cents per gallon. All told, these fees come to 38.9 cents per gallon, and you can see a chart down here with the breakdown. And then there was another article I found just a few weeks ago on CBS 8 that breaks all this down. It was written by Richard Allen. According to his breakdown, Californians pay actually more than 40 cents per gallon, combining the cap and trade program fees and the low carbon fuel program fees. This was also reflected in the California Energy Commission's report on gasoline from 2019, which you can see the chart right here. Before 2015, Californians did not pay any of these fees or taxes, as you can see, and they've slowly went up, at least until 2018. The 2019 report obviously reporting on data used that predates 2019. But you can see the cap and trade taxes and the low carbon fuel standard taxes have slowly increased up until 2018. By the way, are we proud of this, you guys? I'm talking specifically to the warmongers out there. Is this how we're going to save the world from climate change? By driving up the cost of living for poor and average Americans while we give richer Americans tax-funded coupons for stuff like electric vehicles so that they can pay less for fuel for their cars, so that we can give richer Americans tax-funded coupons for solar panels to put on their roofs so that they can pay less for heating and electricity while poor and average Americans pay more for electricity? Is this how we're going to save the world from climate change? And if that doesn't work, I guess we can resort to throwing soup on fine art in museums these days.
You absolutely suck!
Anyway, speaking of taxes, one of goofy-ass Gavin Newsom's solutions to these high gasoline prices is, get this, folks, new taxes. A windfall profits tax on oil, which Newsom mentioned during his recent debates with the Republican candidate for governor of California. Gavin Newsom mentioned that after the election, he plans on working with the state legislature in California to try to get this new tax through. And I guess they're hoping, goofy-ass Gavin Newsom is hoping that unlike these other taxes that I've talked about, that this new tax will not be passed on to consumers.
That's just not smart.
But that's just the taxes. Let's also talk about the regulatory environment in California, which has restricted fossil fuel supply and production over the last decade. Here's a piece that Mike Schellenberger wrote on his Substack a few weeks ago titled Gaslighting on Gas Prices. Schellenberger talks about how independent experts agree we are operating now in a tight market, said Shad Hiat, a University of Southern California associate professor of business. So if one refinery goes off due to maintenance, the prices are going to jump because we do not have much slack. And again, this is not a new discovery. This was covered in that chart I mentioned earlier from the California Energy Commission. If you notice the blue in this chart, how whenever there's a refinery outage in California, gasoline prices have spiked as a consequence. Maybe this would be less of a problem if we had more refineries in places like California. Schellenberger goes on to say, indeed, those experts have been warning California policymakers for decades that the state lacked refinery capacity. A 2000 report by the state's attorney general pointed to constraints on supply for California's unique clean-burning gasoline and higher taxes as the reason for the state's higher prices. The way we're doing it now is you just let fuel costs go up and then we leave poor people with no ability to get anywhere, said Tufts University energy expert Amy Myers-Jaff, going on to say, and then California leaders grandstand against oil companies. That is not a solution.
You're goddamn right.
Michael Schellenberger goes on to say that if Newsom and other politicians really wanted to lower gasoline prices, economists say they would have to expand refinery production and cut taxes. Quote, if the goal is to help Californians hit specifically by high gas prices, noted Borenstein, nothing will be nearly as targeted as a gas tax holiday, unquote. This was also talked about in this article on Cal Matters, written a few weeks ago by Dan Walters, titled Who is to Blame for California's High Gas Prices?, where he talks about how it has been repeatedly demonstrated that California's relatively high gas prices are largely if not completely, explainable by unique factors such as the state's particular refining recipe meant to minimize smog-producing emissions, its high taxes, and its overall high cost of doing business. More recently, California has been decreasing refinery capacity.
That's just not smart.
Due to the state's commitment to eliminating gas-powered cars and trucks and shifting to zero-emissions vehicles powered by batteries or hydrogen. Refiners are unwilling to invest in production upgrades when their operations face state-mandated phase-out. Keep in mind, this is something that Gavin Newsom did over the last couple of years. He signed an executive order seeking to ban gas-powered vehicles by 2035.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
And as in-state refining declines, California is no longer a self-contained fuels island. It becomes increasingly subject to the global commodities market with the disadvantage of requiring specially formulated fuel that cannot be readily attained from outside sources. Keep this in mind because another article on the LA Times also talks about this, written a few weeks ago by Grace Toohey, titled California Repeatedly Warned About Spiking Gas Prices, Fragile Supply, but Fixes Never Came. Now, I do not agree with everything in this article, but it does touch upon something. It touches upon the trend that I'm talking about here. Talking about how Andrew Lippow, the president of consulting firm Lippow Oil Associates, has agreed that a gas reserve such as the U.S. has for crude oil could help, but he said another way to reduce costs would be to relax some of California's strict regulations on fuel during emergency times, although that comes with environmental trade-offs. Other ideas, such as building more refineries or a new pipeline to California, stand in sharp contrast with the state's goals to move away from fossil fuels-related infrastructure. And again, going back to the Energy Commission's report from 2019, they also talk about this when talking about refinery outages. Talks about how pipelines neither connect the refinery hubs in Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay Area to each other, nor to other refinery areas outside of California. So imagine if we had more pipelines. A problem with California gasoline is a lack of pipelines. Going back to the LA Times article, Lippow said a more environmentally sound option would require a change to a decades-old federal law that allows only American-made vessels to ship goods between U.S. ports, which has forced California to rely on foreign imports when gas supplies run low, raising costs.
That's just not smart.
Anyone want to take a guess at what this decades-old federal law is? It's the fucking Jones Act, folks. And while we're on this topic of relying on global commodities, being vulnerable to global commodities, relying on foreign imports, you know what California has been specifically hit by, impacted by, is the U.S. government's sanctions on Russian oil imports. This is according to an article from the LA Times written by Nancy Rivera Brooks on March 9th of 2022. I think this was written the day after Joe Biden announced a ban on Russian imports, titled California's High Gas Prices Have a Little Known Ingredient, Russian Oil.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Article talks about how the amount of Russian oil imported into the West Coast has been on the rise, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. Those refiners led by Marathon and Chevron already are replacing Russian oil with supplies from South America, Northwest Europe, and the Middle East, Lippow said. The new foreign oil will demand a higher price as the Russian oil ban further inflames energy markets. Quote, I know that California's gasoline is so expensive compared to the rest of the nation, said Lippow. Unfortunately, I have bad news. The average there in California is going to go up by at least another 25 cents per gallon. Article goes on to say that California refiners used about 11.3 million barrels of Russian crude last year, followed closely by Washington at 10.4 million barrels. A large percentage of the gasoline refined in Washington is sold in California. And I want to be clear here. I want to be absolutely clear. This is not to say that I oppose sanctions on Russian imports. What I am saying is that these sanctions would be much less severe. They'd have a much less severe impact on stuff like gasoline prices if Democrats had not bent over backwards to oppose fossil fuel production for the last 10 to 20 years, especially in a place like California. Maybe if we had more infrastructure like pipelines and refineries in California, and we had fewer restrictions on trade like the Jones Act, which you can say in all fairness is outside of California's control, the U.S. would not be nearly as reliant on imports from places like Russia. And then there's also the fact that Gavin Newsom has continued this tradition, this Democrat tradition of being hostile toward fossil fuel energy. Here's a press release from April of 2021 where Governor Gavin Newsom announces that he's taking action to phase out oil extraction in California.
That's just not smart.
Governor Gavin Newsom today directed the Department of Conservation's Geologic Energy Management Division to initiate regulatory action to end the issuance of new permits for hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, by January 2024. Additionally, Governor Newsom requested that the California Air Resources Board analyze pathways to phase out oil extraction across the states by no later than 2045. Now, some of you guys might be hearing this and you might think, well, technically this is all supposed to take place in the future. How is this having an impact on gas prices now? Well, California has already been denying more fracking permits than ever, even ahead of the 2024 ban. Even the LA Times editorial board last December announced this, talked about this, celebrating the fact that California has been issuing fewer fracking permits. This also doesn't mention the fact that Gavin Newsom has actually had to reverse California regulatory policies to bring down the price of gasoline. This is according to an article on CBS News from September 30th of this year. Newsom orders early arrival of winter blend of gas to slow rising prices at the pump. Article says Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered state officials to lift restrictions on producing cheaper winter blend of gasoline to slow the steep increase in the price of unleaded at the pump. Under federal law, refineries are required to switch to blends that limit emissions from May 1st to September 15th. However, in California, the switch back to winter blends does not take place generally until October 31st. So Gavin Newsom had to relax this regulation to bring down prices. So considering all of this, considering the taxes upon taxes and all of the restrictions on fossil fuel production and transportation, and the fact that prices in California are much higher than other states in the U.S., that begs a question. Are the high gasoline prices in California, are they a result of corporate greed or a result of government intervention in fossil fuels?
That's a mystery.
Alex Epstein also talked about this the other day in a recent article on his Substack. He titled, America's Energy Crisis is Mostly U.S. Democrats' Fault. This is a really good piece, and Alex goes out of his way to explain that he's not doing this to dunk on the Democrats. You can see the first sentence. He says, I don't identify as Republican or Democrat. And I think at one point he says he's not doing this to merely dunk on the Democrats or score political points, and that he wishes that Democrats would be better on energy policy. And I agree with that. I think we can all agree that America would be better if Democrats embraced better economic policies. But Alex Epstein brings up a good point in this article when he talks about, right here, he says, is it any wonder that, threatened incessantly by U.S. Democrats and other anti-oil forces, that global investment in oil declined dramatically despite growing long-term demand? Between 2011 and 2021, oil gas exploration investments declined by 50%. Saying less investments equals less supply equals higher prices. Considering all of this, why would anyone in their right mind want to invest in fossil fuel production, especially in California, when permits are costly, and even if you get a permit, the political establishment might shut you down tomorrow or next month or whenever? They might scapegoat you for higher gasoline prices and then tax you accordingly. With this windfall profits tax that they're kicking around, they're basically trying to make it illegal in California to make too much money on gasoline, on selling gasoline. Who in their right mind would want to invest in gasoline production in California when this is the state of politics? And unfortunately, it looks like Californians are going to re-elect this total clown show in 2 weeks. So yeah, Californians, have fun with higher gasoline prices, I guess. I guess if gas prices go up any further, Gavin Newsom, he'll just scapegoat big oil again. He'll find a convenient scapegoat before sending you a stimulus check with money, you know, judging by all of the taxes I've been talking about, paid for with money that was already taken from you in the first place. What a wonderful guy.